Hi everyone and welcome to another ranking video. So in this series I take a look at the last 10 new to me board games that I've played and I rank them from my least favourite up to my most favourite. Now before I get started on the 10 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 10 I have Ave Caesar. Now this is a racing game dating back to 1989. It's very simple as every player has an identical deck of cards. You're going to have 3 of those cards at random in your hand at any time and you're going to use them to move around at this racetrack. Now it's a chariot racing game, so I do like the theme of this one. You know, I tend to like Roman themed games. And simply all you're going to do on your turn, you're going to play one of these cards and move that many spaces. Now there are kind of inner side, you know, the fast lanes and slower lanes. But I suppose the trick on this one is that you need to move the full amount of spaces on those cards. Otherwise you cannot move at all. So, you know, you need to bear that in mind, and the decks are quite finely balanced where if you waste too much movement or if you're not moving quick enough, then you're not actually going to make it around the whole track at all, because you know your deck only kind of just about gets you around the whole track itself. Now there are a few little additional rules, such as attacking other players, as you'd expect in a chariot racing game, but for me that didn't really come through enough. I think there should have been a lot more kind of barging into each other, kind of sabotaging each other, throwing stuff on the track, you know, a bit more chaos and carnage, which was what I'd like to see from you know, a chariot racing game. I also found this game very frustrating at times, as if you get kind of stuck in the pack and you weren't at the front, then you would often get blocked and not be able to move at all. And it never feels good if you spend your whole time not being able to do anything. You do kind of have to use these proxy you know, AI chariots on the game, but it's very simple to manage. And you know what, for me this does feel like a product of its time. I don't think it's aged particularly well, and I think, you know, such a simple game with a simple framework could have had so many little bits of spice to make it a bit more interesting, where I think it missed an opportunity. Now I'm sure there are a ton of kind of fan-made modules or rules you could add in, because again that rule structure is so easy, but from the rules alone in the box, and that's what I have to rate it on, I think it isn't quite good enough to hold up to modern racing games such as, you know, Flamme Rouge or Heat, or even games like Downforce. I think all of those are better than Ave Caesar. At number 9 I have Black Friday. Now this is an economic game by Friedemann Friese, actually a game that's getting reprinted this year with revised rules, and sadly I can see why this game needs revised rules, because this game was far too chaotic for my liking. So as you'd expect with an economic game, you are trying to buy low, sell high through this ever-changing market. The market is changing based on these kind of briefcases you're putting into this bag, drawing them out at random, which will, you know, if you draw loads of the same type of bag, it will really increase that stock price. Whereas if you draw these black briefcases out, it can potentially crash the market for particular, you know, stocks that you're trying to buy. You know, you do have to go on a hunch here. You can have a little bit of control by, you know, investing heavily in a particular stock, putting it in the bag, therefore you've got a better idea about what's going to come out. But ultimately, it's a game you have to roll with the punches and just hopefully get the timing right on when to buy and when to sell. I thought it was a little bit overwrought, a little bit confusing, again, too chaotic for my liking, and I think there are better economic games out there for me. Therefore, I cannot really recommend Black Friday, but who knows, the revised version could fix some of those problems for me, but I can't really see how you change it without completely kind of reworking this game from the ground up. At number 8 I have Mysterium Park. Now this is essentially a bare bones and simplistic version of the original Mysterium. It got rid of a lot of the fiddly rules of the original Mysterium, which I definitely think works to the benefit of Mysterium Park. It makes the setting up of the game so much faster, which was another huge obstacle of the original Mysterium. But this game kept all the core gameplay experience, with the ghost player trying to give out clues to the other players to help signpost them to pick out their card on this kind of central display. Now, although I like the setting of this one being kind of a haunted theme park carnival, I actually think it did work against the game, because all of the visual aesthetic of the cards looks similar, making it more difficult to kind of cherry pick features on those cards, especially when it comes to the location cards, and that definitely did get us stuck into a bit of a corner where we couldn't really differentiate all the different location cards because they were so similar and all based on a carnival. So it would have been, although I like what they're going for here, I think it's definitely backed itself into a corner with what you could do with the artwork here. So I think Mysterium is fine. I think there are other games of the same genre that I prefer so much more. Games like Dixit, games like Detective Club. This one I think is just fallen below those ones so far to me that I wouldn't really want to play this one above those. So for that reason I can't really recommend it, but I definitely think it's done a good job of fixing that fiddly nature of the original Mysterium. At number 7 I have Marvel Remix. Now this is the Marvel themed version of the popular card game Fantasy Realms, a game where you're collecting an optimal hand of cards which synergize with each other to get as many points as you can. Now this game did make a few changes, although the gameplay is essentially the same. This one I think did a good job of reining the wild scoring back to make it a bit more approachable and a bit more welcoming to more introductory gamers, because you're not scoring 100 points for a single card. You're scoring a lot less than that to make it a bit more controlled. There's another few restrictions, as you can, I think every single hand of card you have, you need to have at least one good guy, either like a hero or like an ally. And you've even got these kind of villains which will score in different ways. The items that they've got to wear, all these different stuff which will synergize with each other. Some giving you negative points, some giving you positive points. Trying to again get the optimal bunch of cards in your hand by the time the game finishes. Now I'm sure if you're watching this video, you know what Fantasy Realms is all about, so there's no point really talking about it much further. But for me, I would rather choose Fantasy Realms over this one because I enjoy that wild nature, those high scoring cards. For me, that makes it a bit more exciting. And although it's harder to calculate your final score, the original Fantasy Realms does have a very good scoring app to work out your scores for you. So for those reasons, I'd rather play Fantasy Realms over Marvel Remix, but I can certainly see why, especially if you're a Marvel fan, why you would choose Remix over the original. At number 6, I have East India Companies. Now this is an economic euro based on the supply and demand mechanism. It has a little bit of worker placement, which I think is kind of superfluous. It doesn't really help the game much because you kind of know what you're doing anyway, and it feels a bit rinse and repeat as you originally start with a bunch of basic ships. Then with the worker placement actions, you're upgrading them, maybe buying an extra spot for a new ship. You're going to do that anyway, so there's no real angst to get to those ones because you know what you're going to do before the game even begins. Then you're visiting these different locations, loading your ship with these different goods, and then trying to sell them based on this initiative order, based on supply and demand. So if you've got a particular resource where there's none left in the market, you're going to get a ton of money by refilling that particular resource type. Now I did find the game pretty predictable. You would kind of go through the same motions again and again. It was a very procedural game where you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And for me, it did feel a little bit on the rails, and the scoring itself felt very incremental. There were a few little ways where you could amplify your scoring, but for me, it was too dependent on the initiative order, where the faster ships would fill up the markets quicker, and get the high scoring goods or money for the goods you've delivered. Whereas if you're slower, you get a much smaller amount of money, which is the whole point of the game. But for me, it just didn't have those levels of excitement. Again, it did feel very much on the rails. It actually reminded me of a game called Francis Drake, which I think did everything this game does but better. And I wasn't even a huge fan of the original Francis Drake because it was too long. But this one, yeah, I just don't feel like it had a spark. I think it was a little bit too, I don't know, I just think it was too small in what it did. It didn't have any exciting moments at all. And that's sad really, because I was quite excited to play this one because on paper, it has a lot of things that I enjoy. But in practice, it feels very much going through the motions. And yeah, it didn't really do it for me, sadly. So that is East India Companies at number 6. At number 5, I have Lakshadweep. Now this is a 2-player only tile placement game, as you are both building a map of these islands together, trying to score based on the different elements on those tiles. So you have these kind of fish markets where you will get random points depending on where you place them, trying to have the hotels that you're trying to build based on the amount of people on these different islands, trying to build houses based on a sliding scale set collection benefit, and whoever's got the most coral of their colour on the whole board will get a fixed amount of points, and so on. So very simple set collection benefits and ways to score points here. But the twist on this game is that when you're drafting these tiles to place onto the board, what's on one side will be reversed on the other side. So say on one side there was the purple player's coral and the orange player's hotel. You flip it the other way, then it would be the orange player's coral and the purple player's hotel. So it was quite nice how, for one person it would be the opposite on the other side. And then you're trying to place them optimally, trying to get as most points as you can by the game's end. Now, for me, although I liked that kind of reverse tile mechanism and the idea of it, for me it was quite obvious on how to optimally place each tile. For me, some of the different scoring elements weren't as strong as the others. For example, I completely ignored that coral each time I played this one, and it really served me because in relation to all the other scoring mechanisms, that was pretty minor, I suppose. Of course, if you've got an island with a ton of people on it, you've got to put a hotel on there to get the most points, and so on. So yeah, it was always quite obvious about what to choose to get the most points, but the game did flow very nicely. It's a good introductory game for tile placement if you want to play with younger children. But for me, at this point, it's not really what I'm looking for. It didn't give me the highs, it didn't give me anything to wrap my brains over, and any real good decision space. So that's why, although I like the game, I definitely won't be playing it much more. That is Lac Shadweep at number 5. At number 4, I have The Golden Ages. Now, this is a Euro civilization game by KIENDA. It came out quite a few years ago to very little fanfare. Not many people know about this one, but it does have quite a few redeeming features, and I ended up enjoying this one way more than I thought I was going to. I think it was a very nice game, and definitely had more things develop and start to unravel the more I played it, and thinking, what first wasn't apparent did become apparent by the end. But this one, you are essentially building up this map, trying to visit these different locations, tapping or exhausting your workers based on different things, such as collecting wonders, which will give you kind of ongoing powers or instant benefits. The same goes for these buildings, and upgrading these technologies on your player board to make you move faster or get you points based on different things you're controlling, making you more efficient at attacking other players, and so on. Now, the whole twist on this game is the timing element, because generally if you want to do one thing, something else is going to go to your opponent. So there's very few options available to you. There's very few buildings. There's very few wonders available to you. There's a race to get your kind of buildings built on the map itself. And again, if you are going for this certain wonder, then that best building is going to go. If you want to move this worker, then that wonder is going to go. So it's all about knowing, what to prioritize, I suppose. Now, this game also had a very cool mechanism where if you are the first player to pass, as in step out of the round, then you get to choose a certain scoring criteria that will score for the end of the round. So it might say, if I pass first, I could say, I'll choose this tile here that's going to give me 2 points for every technology that I've unlocked. And knowing that I'm way ahead of my opponent, I might think that's going to suit me better, because if they pass, they're going to choose a different card, and that's not going to help me at all. That's going to help them way more than it's going to help me. So sometimes you have to give up even actions to solidify the scoring criteria that you want. I also had some other wrinkles to the game where each round you get given a new kind of leader, and you can choose to keep your existing one or kind of commit to the new one, which will give you new game-breaking powers that can align with your overall strategy. And sometimes it's worth you holding on to the original one, which happened in this game that we played. So I quite like the kind of micro decisions here that do build up to a bigger picture. And again, a game that you probably have to wait till halfway through the game to understand how everything fits together and understand all the moving parts. So I was quite impressed by this one. I'm not sure if I'm going to go back to it, but at face value, it was a very solid game, one that I think is overlooked and underrated, and I enjoyed it way more than I was expecting to. So that is The Golden Ages at number 4. So let's get into the top 3 games now, and this is where my commendations will begin. So at number 3, I have First Contact. Now, I was very much on the fence with giving this one a commendation or not, and that's not because I didn't enjoy the game immensely, which I certainly did, But it's because I think this game has its audience and some people are going to bounce off it hard because it's not the easiest game to teach and to internalize. But this is a kind of semi-cooperative game, as some people are going to be aliens, some players are going to be the humans, and you are trying to establish a means of contacting each other or communicating with each other through this unwritten language. So you are, as the game develops, you are learning what certain words mean and the symbols correlating to those particular words. And you're going to do that by kind of a codename system where the human players are going to tap a bunch of these cards in this central area, and the alien player is going to give a symbol relating or linking all those particular cards together. And then, you know, say you've got a bunch of animals, for example, you might give a symbol for animal, therefore the players from now on know what animal means. And then what the alien player is trying to do is he's trying to find a certain number of these items on the board, and he wants the human players to give those items to the alien. So it's not the easiest game to explain verbally. You do have to play maybe a turn or two to understand how the game works. But once it flows, it does flow nicely. You know, the human players asking for what words mean, and then the alien players asking for an artifact. But it's very cool how you can start using symbols that haven't even been used yet or been asked for yet. And then the other players can kind of deduce what those words might mean. And by the end of it, you are just communicating with each other using a complete gibberish language, which is quite fascinating. So although there are some definitely kind of teething issues here, and there is a steep learning curve and some frustration at times, when it clicks, it is very satisfying, and you can end up kind of talking with each other again through this completely fabricated language. So very different, definitely a unique game, one of the strangest games I've played this last year, and I think this game is very interesting. I enjoyed it so much. And it'll be interesting to see if it holds up to repeated plays once that novelty factor has gone. So that's why I'm on the fence with giving it a commendation. So maybe it'll fall, maybe the repeated plays will increase my enjoyment of it. I think this might be a game that I have to play sparingly, not too often. But when it hits the table, I'm pretty sure it's going to hit. So it's you know, I think you're either going to love it or you are going to find it frustrating, I think. But I personally fall into that former camp, and right now I think it's a fantastic game. So that is First Contact at number 3. At number 2, I have Oligaranja. Now this is kind of more of my traditional type of games that I enjoy, a mid-weight Euro with some multi-use card play. One of the best examples of multi-use card play that I've seen, to be honest, as you are either kind of using these cards as contracts to try and put resources on them to get coverage on this area control part of the board. You can use them as ongoing player powers. You can use them to harvest more goods. You can use them to fulfill more orders. And, you know, if you're doing one thing, you're going to give up on something else. So I love that tension. And then you go into a bit of a dice drafting phase where you're getting kind of the option to play more cards, to collect more resources. And then you are essentially trying to fulfill as many orders as you can. You've got these, again, your personal contracts, which will let you compete in that area control part of the game. Or you have these public contracts, which if you complete them, you'll get ongoing income, such as getting these really cool commodity bonuses, or getting you more resources each round, getting you more money each round. And money in this game is extremely tight. So again, more traditional Euro fare here. I think that standout part of the game is definitely the multi-use card system, but the rest of it, I think it all harmonises quite well, despite initially being a little bit procedural. You know, you go to this phase, to this phase, to this phase. But I think after a whole turn structure through the game, things start to resonate pretty quickly, and then it flows very organically. So I played this one a few times now. It's gone down well each time. I haven't tried any of the additional modules that come with the deluxe master set of the game. So that's kind of my next port of call, is to try and introduce some of those modules to see how it adds some variety and some interest to that core gameplay, which I enjoy a lot. So definitely a strong recommendation from me. This is one of those games that was never really a huge Euro game out there, but now it's got a, it's been reintroduced with this new deluxe theme, or new deluxe production. It's nice that more people have got their hands on it and can enjoy solid, well put together, well-rounded Euro games like this one. So that is La Granja at number 2. And finally, at number 1, I have War Chest. So War Chest is kind of a pure abstract strategy game, almost in the vein of chess, but much different than chess. as you are using these military units to navigate around the map, trying to control these different regions. As soon as you have a certain amount of control markers on the board, you will win instantly. But the kind of coin system that you use in this game is so interesting and so well executed, as you are kind of building up this bag full of these tokens and drawing 3 out each round. And then you have to decide how to use those particular units. Are you going to deploy them onto the map? Are you going to use them to control existing units? Are you going to boost their strength to give them more health points? Are you going to use their tactics? Because all of these different units have unique abilities. For example, the archers can shoot at range. The lancers can charge at you. You've got these scouts that can spawn out in places. And it's all about trying to exploit the small but hugely different abilities of each of these different units. And because this game is so well balanced, kind of every micro decision in this game is so important. The turn order is important. How much you're adding into your bag, bearing in mind that you can have a stronger unit on the board, but if you have a stronger unit on the board, that means there's fewer tokens in the bag to move and use that unit. So many layers of the gameplay here that I can't even scratch the surface in a little summary like this. And I think this game is genius and objectively brilliant. There's not many games out there that I think are objectively great, because this is such a subjective hobby, but I think you'd have to go quite far to pick fault with this one. It might not be your cup of tea, but the game design is close to perfect, especially when you add in the nobility expansion, which not only adds in more units to play with, but it adds another way to add new tactics and strategy into the gameplay as well, to make it an even richer experience. I'm absolutely mind blown by this one. Another game that's one of the best games I've played this year for sure. And I think it is absolutely amazingly designed. So if you like your abstract strategy games, then this one is a no-brainer. But even if you don't traditionally like those games, like I don't, this one is still worth a look, because although it does have that chess-like feel to it, because of that random nature of the token draws, it's not perfect information. So you still have those moments of excitement, and it's not so rigid as, say, a game of chess. But that is War Chest. In love with this one for sure. So that concludes the video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it and found it useful. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.